Okay, well this is a video that I've thought about making for some considerable time now and never done it, and it's strange really because this is something that's impacted on so many other discussions that I've had on this subject of morality, which is something that we do to death in this corner of YouTube, but I've never really given my perspective on what morality is, and I think that my perspective on what morality is and what our moral statements are about is substantially different from a lot of other people. So I want to try and outline my position now so it puts into context everything else that I say. Perhaps the first thing I should do is start off with something which would be quite contentious for a lot of people, which is to say what I don't think morality is. And what I don't think morality is and what our moral statements and discussions are about are what most people take it to be about, which is about the self, about the individual, especially when we're talking about normative moral standpoints about what our morality should be. People view it from the first person, about how should I behave in one way or another. How should I behave to benefit other people? How should I behave in a way that will reflect through some kind of reciprocal principle to benefit myself, perhaps? How should I best behave so that I stand well in other people's eyes? I think there is a part in that, certainly as we've moved along to looking at how we reflect in other people's eyes, but that is not in the first instance. So I would suggest to you, and I hold this as a piece of evidence here, that if morality was about ourselves, well, we wouldn't need anything like the amount of endless discussion that we have on morals. We seem to arrive at our own moral standpoints with relative ease. Some of them are entirely intuitive and we arrive them almost in the blink of an eye, but all other positions do require some thought, but it doesn't seem to require a great deal of thought. Most of the positions that do require a great deal of thought are how can we justify the morals that we do have to other people. And that brings me on to what I think that morality and moral statements is really all about. So my view then, and this is getting to the heart of this video, is that the moral statements that we make are about the behaviours we choose to condemn and condone in others. That morality is our way of influencing the world around us in a way that will benefit to the betterment of not just to ourselves but to those that are close to us, perhaps genetically or perhaps in other ways which help ourselves, or perhaps those that may be close to us, perhaps future children that we may have, perhaps future situations that we may find ourselves in. Now, one thing that's significant here is this does reflect on our own behaviour as well. The reason being that to be taken seriously by people when we're making these moral statements, we need to be seen as a credible moral agent. And to be seen as a credible moral agent, we're going to have to fulfil some specific criteria. The first is that the moral claims that we make are going to have to be reasonable claims. If they're unreasonable claims, people will just disregard them. Those claims are going to have to be consistent with what we see in the world, but also self-consistent with other claims that we have made. The third thing, that we need to do to be seen as a credible moral agent is that we're going to have to be shown to uphold the morals that we're proclaiming ourselves. So rather than morals being about ourselves and then us expecting other people to act in the way we act, I propose to you that it's entirely the other way around. Our moral statements are about how we want other people to act, but as a consequence of that, if we want to influence other people, we need to be seen as a credible moral agent. And one way of doing that is that we're going to have to live by the standards that we're setting for other people. One thing that's quite enlightening in all of this is that when you see people's moral behaviour, as a general rule, people do live by the standards that they expect of other people, but not to quite the same degree. We proclaim a certain standard for other people, but we never quite live up to it. We get close enough so that maybe people can't quite see the gap. Sometimes we try and make excuses for ourselves, don't we, why we are the exception. Why, well, we're going to propose this certain rule, but it isn't going to apply to me on this specific circumstance because of A, B, or C. And something else which I find very telling at this point is that we don't seem to hold to our same moral standards with quite the same enthusiasm when nobody else is watching. It seems that when we're going to be held to account, when our status as a credible moral agent may be under the spotlight, then we stick to those moral standards that we proclaim far more than when nobody is watching. Now what I don't want to do at this point is to make a series of kind of meaningless retroactive predictions of the kind that Kent Hovind sometimes used to do, or the kind of things that Stephen Jay Gould would talk about as just so stories. I certainly don't want to make any kind of just so claims, but I do want to make a few points here. The first point that I want to make is to look at what you could call altruistic moral claims in the light of this perspective. Altruistic moral claims are something that perhaps we have more problems with than any other. Why would we make altruistic moral claims? Maybe they benefit us in terms of how people view us, but that's about it. Why would we do that if morality was about ourselves? Well, what I want to suggest to you is if morality isn't about ourselves but the way we're trying to influence behaviour in others, then making altruistic moral claims makes absolute sense, because when we make the moral claim that it's morally good to help others, we're not actually talking about us helping other people, we're talking about other people helping other people, and that's going to involve other people helping us and people that are valuable to us, either genetically or through their specific relationship with us. Of course, when we make that claim, for that claim to be taken seriously, as I've said before, we need to be seen as a credible moral agent, so we're going to have to live up to that claim to some degree ourselves. It does reflect back on us, but this is a different way of looking at it. The claim is about other people and it's reflecting back on us. It's not that the claim is about us and then it's reflecting onto other people. So that brings me on to the second point that I could make here, which if you simplify and knock a few edges off the side, you can turn this into quite an interesting and quite a familiar sounding phrase, which would be along the lines of have others do unto you that which you are prepared to do unto them. Doesn't that sound somewhere like a kind of inverse of do unto others as you would have them do unto you? The golden rule, the principle of reciprocity that's been found independently in all these different cultures around the world. So what I'm proposing then, if you take this viewpoint that I've come up with there, I'm not suggesting it's something that I've come up with that nobody else has come up with, of course, but this viewpoint that I'm proposing here, what you have is an underpinning for the principle of reciprocity that stems really from self-serving principles rather than from altruistic principles that are actually quite difficult to explain in an evolutionary context. Okay, so I just want to make one last point before I leave it where it stands, before I've said all I want to say on this, open the floor and allow you to come back at me and say, actually, I think that's quite a good way of looking at it. I think you're talking total shite on this one, Jim. Before I do that, just one more point, and that concerns the is-ought gap, which is a real problem, isn't it, when we talk about morality? Sometimes it seems like an unbridgeable, huge chasm that there's no way of getting across. We can describe what morality is and talk about a definition of what that morality is that we're describing, and we talk about where we'd like to be, what we ought to do, but how do we get from one to the other? I'm not proposing that this way of looking at it bridges that gap, but I do think it shrinks that gap considerably. Consider what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that your moral statements, that moral positions about behaviours we choose to condemn and condone in others for our own betterment, given that we will have to live by a lot of those rules to be seen as a credible moral agent. Well, how would you make an ought argument, a normative argument out of that? Well, I think it would go something like this. That the behaviours that we should choose to condone in others are behaviours that should be to the betterment of ourselves and to those that are genetically or otherwise close to us. Given that to be seen as credible moral agents, we will have to adopt the same behaviour ourselves. So tell me if you think I've gone wrong here, but if you're happy to accept this definition of morality that I've given, and I'm asking you to while you consider the argument that I just made there, and if you're happy with the idea, which I'm happy with, that personally us doing things which are to our betterment is better than us doing things which are to our personal detriment, all other things being equal, then I think that this is a fair stab of giving a normative argument of what our moral statements should be. Okay, well, I'm kind of interested in what you make of what I've said in this video, and I hope that there's some interesting discussion that results from it. Thank you very much for watching this video, and bye for now.